It's Terry Lynch, your host of HFK Presents 5 Minutes of History. When last I left you, I challenged you to figure out who was the first man from Illinois to not only want to marry Mary Todd, but become President of the United States. Penny for your thoughts. I bet you're thinking Abraham Lincoln. You'd be wrong. You see, the first man who wanted both Mary Todd's hand in marriage and to become President of the United States from the great state of Illinois was none other than Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant of the Lincoln and Douglas debate fame. You see, like Lincoln, Douglas came to Illinois to establish himself in many different careers, as a lawyer, as a legislator, and as a politician. You can imagine they crossed paths quite often back in the 1800s, and they did, and they were on opposite sides. Douglas was a Democrat, and Lincoln was a Whig / later Republican, and they didn't get along. And it got worse when Douglas didn't get to marry Mary Todd, and this gangly guy by the name of Abraham Lincoln did. So there was a little animosity between the two. But Douglas didn't let that get in the way, because Lincoln tended to fail quite often. In business, he went bankrupt several times. He ran for several offices and lost those elections, sometimes making it as Congress, sometimes not. Sometimes being in the legislature, sometimes not. So Douglas thought he was just going to be a fly on the wall. Nothing to really bother Douglas. Because you see, as the years went by, Douglas became very successful, and eventually in the late 1840s was the most influential politician and second in power only to the President of the United States. He had established himself as a senator from Illinois who was fair to both sides, the North and the South. He was very influential in trying to postpone the Civil War by coming up with many different compromises. The Great Compromise, dividing the free states and the slave states, and later on the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He was very, very popular amongst the nation, and he was very popular in Illinois, wielding influence over all the different decision makings that went on. Back in 1854, Stephen Douglas nominated a man to run for senator, to be his junior senator. That man ran against one tall, lanky guy by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and a third man by the name of Lyman Trumbull. Lincoln thought he could win, but knew he really wouldn't, because it was still a very Democratic state, and so the Democrats won the seat. Not the Democrat that Douglas wanted, another Democrat by the name of Lyman Trumbull, who immediately changed parties and became a Republican, just like Abraham Lincoln. Well, Lincoln had failed to become senator, but succeeded in getting a Republican into office. So as you can see, Lincoln was used to losing, but winning in the long run. I guess you'd say he knew how to overcome adversity and find a diamond in the rough, so to say. Well, 4 years goes by, and yet again, there is a senator spot up for election. And this time, it's Stephen Douglas himself. Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, challenges Douglas, not only to the senator seat, but to a series of debates. Douglas knows he'll win easily. He's the little giant. He's given speeches all over the country, and he's very comfortable at winning over crowds. And Lincoln, he's just a country lawyer, and he's very clumsy and awkward. So it's going to be hands down Douglas's victory. 7 debates are decided upon, and they're all over the state of Illinois. And Lincoln knows he doesn't have a chance of winning the senatorial spot, because even if he wins over the votes of the people, they're not the ones who elect the senator from Illinois. The state legislature does. So why on earth would he go and put himself up against a guaranteed failure? Because he was looking at the bigger picture. You see, he knew he wouldn't win even if the people wanted him. As a matter of fact, they did. They voted for Lincoln to be the senator, but the legislature, majority Democrat, decided to send Douglas back instead. Lincoln knew this, but he also knew something else. Because Stephen Douglas was so successful as a senator, papers from the East Coast would come to hear him speak. This way, Lincoln got his message out without spending any money. Talk about a good campaign promise. He didn't waste any money on his PR. He had it all put out for him by the papers themselves. So his word got out, and he really didn't want to be the senator. He was looking 2 years down the road when he could run for president, and that's what he did. Coming up again against Stephen A. Douglas, But this time, Lincoln didn't lose. He won, and he did a little bit more than that. He even convinced Douglas at the end of the campaign to start going around campaigning to support Lincoln because Douglas knew he couldn't win. He did just that. Unfortunately, it also cost him his life. He caught a cold, and stress and pressure made it worse and worse and worse. And just after Lincoln was elected president, Douglas passed away. So that ends the competition between Lincoln and Douglas. Well, I'm really grateful that Mr. Lincoln looked past that, and I'm so thankful that he saw the distant goal, even though he had failed many times over. Oh, speaking of which, we've got a goal here. It's time for trivia. Today's trivia has to do with Mr. Lincoln himself. I want to thank Mr. Lincoln for coming up with a national holiday back in October of 1863. He thought even though we had a civil war going on, everyone should be thankful for different things that they had that were good in their lives. So he wanted a national day of recognition to be thankful for everything. It was to be the last Thursday in November. He, back in October of 1863, declared Thanksgiving Day a national holiday. So thanks a lot, Mr. Lincoln. Well, we are just about out of time. If you have questions about what I talked about, or perhaps anything in history whatsoever, give us a little email at info@hfkpresents.com. I'll answer those questions in one of my next webcasts. You know, we've got to get going. And I want to tell you one other thing. These days, it is so difficult to find a bargain. We're always looking, kind of like the shrewd shoppers. And to finish off our month of presidents, I want to tell you about one of the best bargain hunters of the day, a president of the United States of America. So join me next time. And you know how you'll find out? By checking out our Facebook page, HFK Presents. And if not, check out one of our blogs. That'll tell you when we're going to have our next webcast. Until then, this is Terry Lynch with HFK Presents 5 Minutes of History. Remember, folks, watch out. History happens when you don't expect it.